And welcome back to Monster Minis. Today I'm going to be building some American walkers from the Dust 1947 universe. The first one is the Fireball or Punisher variant, depending upon the armament, and the second one is the Long Tom Sky Sweep or Command Walker. Wanted to give myself a good base to work off of, so both of the walkers were primed with Mr. Finishing Surfacer 1500 Black. In an upcoming video, you're going to see an M10 tank destroyer that's been modified for the Dust universe. As part of that project, I got this aftermarket 48 scale M10 stowage kit. Obviously, the pieces that are meant for the M10 stay with the M10 kit, but there was a lot of leftovers, little like pouches and rucksacks, that I thought would look great on the Long Tom. Great weathering happens in layers, and I really like building the base layer for the rust and the chipping effects at the very beginning. I used Ammo of MIG's heavy chipping effects. Once the brown rusty color was in place and dry, I hit both of the walkers with 2 coats of this. Let it set up, let it dry before starting with the full camouflage scheme. I really like that US Marine Corps tanks in World War II actually leaned into some camouflage schemes, unlike American tanks in the European theater. I have this Ammo of MIG Sherman tank camouflage set, and it had some colors that I really liked. So we're going to be doing a tricolor US Marine Corps Pacific Theater camouflage look. I'm just going to freehand this in where I think it looks good, where I think the stripes need to go, and start with a deeper brown color, and then highlight each of those brown lines with a fairly bright color down the center of the line. Trying to build that depth of color even in the camouflage, because it'll really pay dividends later on. The eagle-eyed among you will notice that I did go back off camera and highlight the green as well after the colors have been applied. And then that desert yellow gets highlighted with a extremely bright yellow. And as you're probably thinking, that's way too bright. I feel like when you're doing camo like this, or you're doing anything like this with a model where you have the ability to push the highlights a little bit further than you think you should, I think you should. I think you should push it a little bit further. Make it a little comic booky. Because if you're going to come in with weathering effects and washes and dirt and grime, it's all going to get knocked down. And if it's not a little obnoxious when you're done with this step, you'll lose a little bit of it in the final effect. Now it's time to chip it. This step is always bittersweet for me because I feel like it looks really cool, but at the same time, you are absolutely destroying this really cool paint job that you just did. I've found that I like to use a couple different tools for this. A wet paintbrush is great for getting the area wet, but I don't feel like the brush gives you the control that you want for really removing paint in fine areas. So I have an old airbrush needle that I use the tip for doing really fine detail work, and I use the blunt end of it doing edges and exposed surfaces so I can really control the chipping effect. And when I'm looking at the model, I try to just decide, where the crew would use the tank. How would I get into it? Where would I climb up on it? Where would be the places that we would store gear? Where would be the places that we would sit and hang out? And I try to target those areas for heavier chipping than, say, the flat surfaces. Now, on the legs, that's a totally different story. I mean, this is a walker that is trundling through the jungles of the Pacific and crashing through all kinds of heavy foliage. So the legs had to be massively chipped. They were going to show a lot of wear. With the chipping complete, I hit it with a coat of glossy Lucky Varnish to seal it all in and get it ready for the next step. I admittedly have not had great luck with Ammo of MIG's decal solutions. I feel like the decal set, number 1 in the scheme, is very caustic to my paint job and ends up causing issues with the airbrush work, even going over coats of gloss varnish. So I did what anybody does in 2026, and I asked ChatGPT, what am I doing wrong with these decal solutions to where they're messing up my paint job? And ChatGPT's recommendation was to skip step 1 and not lay the decal set down, and then just use step 2, the decal fix, to soften the decals once they were on the surface. So taking the AI's advice, I went for that on this project, and I have to say I was really happy with the results. So I skipped the decal set. I just placed the decals where I wanted them, like I regularly would after soaking them in water. And then once they were down and dry, hit them with the decal fix to soften them up and let them sit down into the texture. And I think it came out pretty good. I used a collection of aftermarket dust decals, some decals from some 1/35th scale model kits that I've had laying around, and of course the obligatory P47 Thunderbolt kit that has been used in almost every project since I decided to part it out. There's some really famous photos of U.S. Marine Corps Shermans in the Pacific, and one of my favorites is of that Marine Corps Sherman that is painted King Kong. And when I saw that I had a King Kong decal in one of these decal sheets that I had to use it. I thought that this was just a really cool callback to that time, and that why wouldn't this happen? Like if we're in 1947 and we've got a U.S. Marine Corps unit operating in the Pacific, the legacy of King Kong would live on. And now that they have these big armored walkers, they would probably anoint one of these and name it King Kong. And so when I saw that decal, I was like, it has to go on. And there was this great surface on the front of the long tom here. And so I picked this spot, and King Kong lives on in Dust 1947. I was somewhere in between a pin wash and a full coat with this. I thinned it down, and in areas where I really wanted it to show these details, like around these exposed exhausts and rivets, I went a little bit heavier. And then in some areas, like I let it run through like the armor texture, and then wiped it off a little bit. So I was really going for a grimy look here. The legs on the walkers are extremely detailed. They have a lot of hoses. They have a lot of intricate detail. They've got a lot of edges and bolts. They're really cool. They're also fairly challenging to paint. And so I knew that I was going to be doing a lot of weathering on these walkers. They were going to be moving through the jungle. So I didn't bother painting a lot of the details in these legs. They're really cool. But I knew it was all going to be covered up with mud and different effects. And so I just did kind of the highlights and some of the hoses. For the rust effects, I'm going to be using Camo's Enamel Streaking Rust Effects and Camo's Enamel Light Rust Wash. I like to get these out in a well and get both of the colors with some mineral spirits and do some more mixing and matching. Like take some areas and use the lighter rust color, the more orangey color, and then some of the other areas use the darker rust color, and just kind of see what I like. So the trick here is to just take whatever color I've picked and lay it on top of the chips. And it's perfectly fine if it pools. The goal here is to get a bit of it here to season these chips that we've laid down already, to season the chips that have already been laid down in the previous steps. Let it dry, and then come back in with a brush that's been moistened with mineral spirits, and then just wipe it away. Because what it's going to do is, as you wipe it away, what it's going to do is leave this rusty residue kind of around the edges, and it ends up just looking really good. And it ends up looking quite rusty when it's done this way. So this is my style and technique for applying rust on top of chipping. World of Tanks actually put out a collection of 35th scale model kits. I got a couple of those when those came out. That was years ago. One of the cool things about these World of Tanks kits is they actually came with lots of interesting decals that matched a lot of the iconography that's part of the game. And this lead magnet decal that I'm going to put on the fireball here was on that decal sheet. And this walker is a lead magnet. I mean, its job is to be the tank. It's heavily armored. It's designed to draw a lot of fire. And I saw that lead magnet decal, and I was like, this is perfect. It already has a cool name with Fireball and Punisher, depending upon how you spec it out. Having the crew name it lead magnet, I thought was just an awesome addition to this model. So for the mud, going to be using Camo's Heavy Mud in the wet mud color and the moist ground color. And for the splashed mud, I'm going to be using Camo's Wet Ground in Splashes. What I really wanted to show here was a layer of mud starting at the pads of the feet and then working its way up the legs to the bottom of the chassis, with the darkest mud colors towards the bottom getting lighter and lighter as it goes up. Trying to simulate the fact that the legs are still in the wet mud in the jungle, and that as that mud has dried, as it's been stomping around and splashing through puddles, as that dries, you get lighter and lighter colors further up the superstructure. My favorite way to apply the mud splashes is to use the airbrush. So the trick for this one is to take a regular paintbrush, stick it into the splashes product, and then hold it at a range from the model you're going to have to get a feel for both the airbrush and the model. And without anything in the airbrush pot, just using the air, do blasts of air across the bristles to splatter the mud from the splashes product onto the model. And you can get a surprising amount of chaos and control. And I use those two terms very loosely here, in that you can really control the effect based upon where you're splashing this onto the model using the airbrush this way. But you also still get that level of splattered chaos that I think looks very authentic using the airbrush to splash it up here. Let me know in the comments if you have a way of doing splashes different than this, that I'd be very interested to hear, but I feel like this just creates such an authentic effect. My start in modeling really started as an armor modeler, building World War II tanks. It's always fun to come back and build armored vehicles because I really enjoy it. It feels like coming home. I love being able to do a majority of the work with the airbrush and being able to freehand camo and really lean into the weathering and make this small little model look like a heavy piece of metal. I don't know how much I'm actually going to field the King Kong in its command walker configuration using this radar dish. It was such a cool subassembly to have this with this control panel that I really wanted to paint it up. So I'm going to use Citadel's technical paints to make this look like a radar station in the back of this walker. So the King Kong has a crew of 7, but I didn't show them to you in this video because I'm going to be painting up a full Marine infantry contingent, which I will paint in exactly the same style as I painted this crew, so look for that in an upcoming video. And here are the finished models. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.